Hi guys, my name is Lauren Gaskell and I'm going to be the presenter for this workshop. I am an Autism Resource Specialist here at Project Access located at Missouri State University. Before I started at Project Access, I taught special education in a surrounding area for 5 years. And for one of those years, I taught Cross Cat Elementary, and for the last 4 years, I taught middle school life skills. I absolutely loved it. It was such a joy working with the kids and the paras and the other teachers I got to collaborate with. I loved watching the kids grow in their academic, behavior, communication, and life skill abilities. I completed my undergrad and my master's at Missouri State, and I also completed the coursework and the supervision to become a licensed behavior analyst, or also known as a board certified behavior analyst. After completing this workshop, you should be able to identify the need for sensory integration and identify what tools the student may need based on their symptoms, and then create a plan for how to integrate sensory tools into your classroom, including how you would teach the learner to use or request their items. Here's kind of an outline of how this workshop's going to go. First, we're going to talk about the basics and the different types of sensory inputs. We're also going to talk about how to implement a sensory tool in the classroom and how to create things like sensory rooms, motor labs, that sort of stuff. We're also going to talk about how to teach our learners to communicate and advocate for what they need, and then you'll have your final project at the end. Sensory integration and exercise and movement are both considered evidence-based practices. Here is a list of 28 evidence-based practices that have been identified as kind of the gold standard for teachers that work with kids with autism. Some other evidence-based practices that you will see talked about today is AAC devices and alternative methods of communication, reinforcement, self-management, visual supports, and functional communication training and modeling. So we're going to start off with talking about sensory processing disorder. So sensory processing disorder, or SPD, is the inability to process information that's received through our senses for generating appropriate responses. So up to 16% of children struggle with SPD. And of that 16%, 95% of them are individuals with autism, and 40% have ADHD, 33% are gifted and talented. So students with autism and ADHD and other disabilities and neurotypical students often struggle with certain sensory needs, even if not diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. I know that some people don't like the sound of others chewing, or they don't like the way certain textures feel on their skin. They don't like certain smells or taste. That's normal. It's normal for all of our bodies to respond differently to different stimuli in our environment, and our senses are going to generate different responses dependent upon our individual likes and dislikes. It does become a problem when those likes and dislikes are excessive, and in the sensory processing fact sheet, I included some of like the checklist and screening tools that are used for sensory processing disorder. And when working with a student who does have sensory processing disorder, it's best to make sure that you have a trained and talented OT who is aware and able to help you plan some sensory activities and sensory diets and those sort of things for those students. Here's a couple different screening tools that may be used by your OT at your school. So there's the SPM2, which means Sensory Processing Measure 2nd edition. There's a really great screening tool at the Sensory Kids Pediatric Services website. And then there's also these assessments that are listed above. So students who have sensory needs in the classroom, it may appear to be behavioral, or that they are purposely trying to bump into people, or they're purposely avoiding doing certain things. It's important to realize that this is a disability, it is a diagnosis, and that if your students are having some of these issues, there are ways you can help them without reinforcing their behaviors, and we'll talk more about that towards the end. So here's some of the different symptoms you might see of students in your classroom, and I'm not going to read every single one of them, but let's read a few. So the first one is heightened reactivity to sound, touch, or movement. Seeking increased amounts of auditory or tactile or movement, such as making noises, constantly touching objects, constantly being on the go. They may be the opposite and appear lethargic or disinterested, and may seem like they're in their own world. They may have poor motor skills, appear to be clumsy, reduced coordination, balance and motor planning skills, poor handwriting. They may have difficulty with daily life skill activities such as dressing themselves, tying shoelaces, self-feeding. They may be picky eaters, difficulty completing hygiene tasks, difficulty engaging with peers and sustaining relationships and friendships. So these are all some of the sensory things that we might see in our classroom, and they might be a key indicator that our student needs extra sensory supports. There are 7 sensory systems that make up the human body: proprioception, gustatory, auditory, olfactory, tactile, vestibular, and visual. Each of these areas are places where a student could have hyper or hypo input. We will talk more about each of those and the signs you can look for, and then we'll talk about some strategies and some activities that your student can do if they're needing more input in those areas. Proprioception is the sense that helps a child with body awareness, and it helps them know where their body is in space. So if they have hypersensitivity, they may be hyperactive, chew on objects that are not meant to be chewed on, love heavy work, enjoy rough play, crash into things on purpose, like to jump around, overstep personal boundaries, purposely drag their hands against the walls and down the hallways, stomp or heavy walk and put pressure on their brow, like right here when they're reading. Some hypo things that you might see is they may have low energy, be clumsy, not want to get out of bed, a high pain tolerance, eats large bites of food before doesn't chew before swallowing, and doesn't understand tongue placements for speech, some of those things. So next we're going to talk about some activities we can do to help those students. So for our students who need more proprioceptive input, we may use a weighted slam ball. We can use a backpack and put some books in it, and or like heavy items, and they can go on missions, walk to the office and come back, those sort of things. We can use a body sock. We can do yoga. There's all different kinds of yoga and dance videos on YouTube. There also are yoga cards that you can get, and I'm sure you can probably find some on Teacher Pay Teacher as well. You can use a trampoline. Any of these items are different ways that you can get that proprioceptive input that your student is needing. Gustatory is the sense that helps a child detect and perceive taste. So people who have a hypersensitivity in this area will generally try to avoid them. They may gag, spit out food, or avoid certain foods. And if they eat them, they may react and go into a sensory meltdown just with the thought of putting the food in their mouth. So a lot of times when teachers see these kind of behaviors, they think, oh, he's just exaggerating. Oh, he just doesn't want to eat his broccoli. A lot of times our students are having these behaviors because it is a sensory, it's a way that their body is processing those sensory inputs. And it is not just to get out of doing their work or to get out of lunchtime. Like a lot of times it is because of a sensory issue that they're having. So people who have hypo sensitivity to this in this area, they may crave certain foods that contain certain tastes, such as salty, sweet, sour. They may also seek out foods with high intense taste and may refuse to eat other foods. So a lot of these students may be constantly trying to put things in their mouth and needing something to chew on. So we can give them chewies that are age appropriate for them to help them get this sensation without chewing on objects and furniture and constantly chewing on food. We can also provide things like gum or mints, Jolly Ranchers, anything like that to help those students as well. Some of our students may have an auditory sensitivity or a hyposensitivity. So if they are hypersensitive to auditory sounds, which is the sense that's responsible for hearing, they may get defensive when certain sounds or frequencies are uncomfortable to their nervous system, and often too much sound is channeled and it becomes overwhelming and resulting in behaviors. Some people may not read those sounds properly, and background noise and words can become reversed, sounds can be left out, and they can have difficulty remembering auditory information that they've heard. So some tools that we can use in our classroom to support these students is a sound machine. You can use headphones. You can help them with by playing music or rattles. There's also some instrumental music that you can use on YouTube, and one of my favorites is the Disney instrumental. And if you look on our sensory tools on a budget guide, these tools are all linked in there for you that you can click on them and it takes you straight to the Amazon page, or in this case the YouTube video for the instrumental Disney music. So the olfactory sense helps us to differentiate between thousands of different odors and determine if things are dangerous, foul, pleasurable, strong, or faint. So some people who have a hypersensitivity in this area may be overwhelmed by smells in their environment. It can lead to avoidance behaviors, distractibility, and irritability. So for example, if your student really hates the smell of the cafeteria, they may have behaviors entering into the cafeteria because they can't stand the smell of it. Or if they know it's going to be lunchtime, they may have behaviors to avoid having to go to the cafeteria because they can't stand the smell of the cafeteria. And they may have a difficulty time concentrating, have nausea or headaches. They may become picky eaters. They may gag when they smell certain foods. They may avoid cafeterias or kitchens. They may avoid people, have avoidance behaviors to get away from certain people who have a strong smell. And they may tend to eat more bland foods because typically they don't have as strong of a smell. So people who have a hyposensitivity to the olfactory sense, they may seek out strong odors. They may smell things in their environment or get distracted by the smells. They may seek out strong flavored food, such as those containing vinegar or other high-intensity food smells. And they may be picky eaters, but seek out food with strong smells. So some different things that we can do in our classroom to support these learners is to use sensory wax or Scentsy type wax containers that have the wax in them that are scented. You can also use essential oils for sniffing, scratch and sniff stickers, scented markers. There's putty that is scented, or also scented lotions. All of these things, like I said, are linked on our sensory tools on a budget PDF. So tactile is the sense that helps a child detect light touch, deep pressure, texture, temperature, vibration, and pain. So some things that you might watch for kids who have hypersensitivity would be touching or eating certain textures can be irritating, uncomfortable, or painful. They don't like their hair washed, their toenails clipped, that sort of thing. Strip off their clothes as soon as possible or resist wearing them at all. They may like extremely tight clothing or extremely loose clothing. They do not let the tongue touch the roof of their mouth for their speech production, and they may not like being touched when standing in line or touching glue, finger paints, and other sticky surfaces, and they may ask to wash their hands frequently. So if they have a hyposensitivity to this, they may not even notice if their hands or face are messy. They may not get upset when they're hurt or not be bothered by serious injuries. They may not notice if they're getting bumped or pushed into. They may hold objects in a way to get more input, and they may have to use a mirror to wash their face, and they may not feel their tongue isolated during speech sounds. So some ways that we can help these students be more comfortable with these senses is giving them more opportunities to use them. So finger paints, sensory, like little fidgets, these little beanbag sensory toys are super cool. And there's some different like tactile felt and like different materials options on Amazon that you can use. You can hang them on the wall and then they can just feel all over them. You could use them during a learning opportunity and say, oh, this one's soft, this one's rough, incorporate it in that way. So vestibular is the sense that detects movement through sensory receptors in the inner ear. So some things that we can watch for is the fear that with change of their body in space, low balance responses, they fall out of chairs, they dislike heights or moving surfaces, dislike uneven surfaces, dislike changing surfaces, and they do not like escalators or elevators. They may be fearful of stairs, opening doors, and floors that change colors. Hypo, they may have the need for movement and often out of their chair. They may increase with fidgeting, crave swinging, will run for the sake of running just because they enjoy the run. They may pace back and forth. They may climb to the highest place on the playground, will climb on shelves and bookshelves. So things that we can do for these students is to provide some more input for them. So we can use swings, yoga balls, balance boards, tricycles, wiggle boards. We may offer some alternative seating such as fidget bands on their chairs, something to fidget with, those yoga ball chairs. We may also use like lap pads so that they're able to sit on the floor and get more input that way. The visual sense helps students to see and detect objects. So students who are hypersensitive to the visual sense may be sensitive to lights, may not be able to process information if there's movement in the room, may be easily distracted by movement, may not be able to read through glare, and they may do better writing on colored paper rather than white paper. They may not, so if a student is hyposensitive to this area, they may not be able to pick out words, letters, or numbers, or find the color of crayon in the crayon box. They may not be able to pick out their item amongst other items, or find a certain book on a shelf. They may not remember what they saw, people's faces, pictures, and words, and they may not recognize letters if they're in different fonts, colors, sizes, or written by other people. There's a lot where this can affect their reading and written academic work. So some different things that we can do is allowing them to wear sunglasses when they're outside, using the blue protectors on our window, on our lights in our classroom to help filter out some of that light. And then some tools we can use in our classroom is toys and lights that provide a lot of visual input for them. And so I've included a couple different options there, using kaleidoscopes to look through, using visual timers or visual red light, green light, yellow lights. And then you can also use a free visual timer on your computer. And I've included that in the free resource that I posted on the workshop. Okay, so let's review. So only learners diagnosed with sensory processing disorder have sensory needs. True or false? False. All of our learners can have sensory processing needs. That doesn't mean that they have sensory processing disorder, but they may need some of the tools that we have in our classroom. Which one is not of the 7 senses? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, vestibular, proprioception, or lumbar? Lumbar. Lumbar is one of the ones we did not talk about. That is not one of the 7 senses. If a learner has hypoproprioception and has low energy, what might be a strategy you could use with them? A calm swing, yoga, jumping on the trampoline, or therapy ball squishes. Jumping on the trampoline would be a great activity for them to do to help get their energy up and give them some proprioception input. If a learner has hypogustatory symptoms and chews on everything, what might be a strategy you could use with them? Requiring 1 bite of everything on their plate, noise-canceling headphones, a therapy chewy or gum, avoiding asking them to take a bite. A therapy chewy or gum would be a great option for this student who chews on everything. If a learner has hypervestibular symptoms and low balance and is afraid of heights, what might be a strategy you could use with them? Play-Doh, projector lights, chewy or gum, animal walks, and a scooter board. Animal walks and a scooter board would be great vestibular activities for this student to do. Many of our schools don't have the space for sensory rooms or motor labs, so an option and a good idea is to create a calm down corner within your classroom. So using bookshelves, rugs, masking tape, dividers, anything like that we can use to create a visual boundary to show that this area right here is the sensory calm down area. We want to make sure that we use visual expectations, so we set some ground rules such as what are they supposed to do when they enter the calm down area, how long are they supposed to be there, what sensory tools are their options. We also want to make sure that we do have sensory tools and some timers available for them. We want to make sure that students are not using the calm down area as a escape from their work, but instead they're using it to regulate their emotions, regulate their sensory senses, and that they're using it to calm down in the moment before they have a behavior episode. Here's some different examples of a sensory room. It doesn't have to look this fancy, it doesn't have to be this pretty, but these are super cool and I did want to show them to you guys, and I linked some different options for different things you can buy in our Sensory Tools on a Budget PDF download.